The sky burned red as alien warships hovered above Earth, their massive hulls blocking out the sun. They had arrived without warning, descending upon the planet like an unstoppable storm. The people of Earth had heard rumors of the Zorvan Empire, an advanced race of machines that sought to wipe out all organic life. But no one had truly believed they would come here, to humanity's home. Now it was too late. Captain Ethan Bonner stood on the rooftop of a crumbling building, gripping his rifle as he watched the devastation unfold. The city was in flames. Towers that once touched the sky now lay in ruins, reduced to nothing but smoking rubble. Screams filled the air, blending with the distant sound of plasma fire, and the deafening roar of enemy drones swooping through the streets. "Captain, we have to move," Sergeant Lewis shouted over the radio. Bonner turned, his jaw clenched. Below him, a small group of soldiers and civilians were huddled behind a collapsed highway bridge, desperately trying to avoid detection. Among them was a woman clutching a young boy, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The child's eyes were wide with terror, but he made no sound. He was too scared to cry. Bonner activated his helmet's HUD, scanning the area. The Zorvans had deployed ground units, tall, metallic constructs with glowing red visors, scanning for survivors. These AI war machines were designed for one purpose: extermination. Bonner had seen entire colonies fall to them in the past, but he had never imagined Earth would face the same fate. "We take the side streets," Bonner ordered, moving quickly. The air beneath the city was cold and stale, thick with the faint hum of distant machinery. Captain Ethan Bonner moved swiftly through the narrow tunnels of the underground resistance base, his footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. The faint glow of emergency lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows as soldiers rushed past him, their faces etched with exhaustion and determination. Somewhere above, the Zorvan war machines continued their relentless assault, but down here, humanity still fought back. Bonner stepped into the command center, a large chamber filled with holographic displays and computer terminals. The hum of advanced technology mixed with the distant rumble of explosions, a constant reminder of the war raging above. General Carter stood at the center of the room, his sharp gaze fixed on a holographic map of the city. Red markers representing Zorvan forces swarmed across the display, closing in on the last pockets of human resistance. "Captain Bonner, we're running out of time," Carter said without looking up. His voice was steady, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight of their situation. Bonner stepped forward, removing his helmet and tucking it under his arm. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, but his resolve remained unbroken. "What's the mission, sir?" Carter gestured to the holographic map. "The Zorvan's main mothership is stationed in orbit, controlling their entire invasion force. Our orbital fleet can't get close. Their shields are too strong. But we've discovered a vulnerability. Their command tower, located near the city center, acts as a relay for the mothership's defense systems. If we can take it out, our fleet can break through and strike the mothership directly." Bonner studied the map, his mind already calculating the risks. The command tower was deep within enemy-controlled territory, surrounded by patrols and automated defenses. "How do we get inside?" Carter's gaze hardened. "We have prototype cloaking suits, limited numbers, but they should let you slip past most of their sensors. Your team will infiltrate the tower, plant explosives at the core, and disable their relay. Failure is not an option. If we lose this chance, Earth falls." Bonner nodded. The odds were impossible, but that had never stopped humanity before. "We'll get it done." Carter placed a hand on Bonner's shoulder. "I know you will. And Bonner, I'm sorry about Shah." The mention of her name hit Bonner like a punch to the gut, but he forced himself to remain steady. There was no time for grief. Not now. She knew the risks. "We all do." Carter nodded solemnly, then turned to the room. "Get to your stations. We launch in 20 minutes. Bonner left the command center and made his way to the armory, where his team was preparing for the mission. Sergeant Lewis stood near the weapon racks, checking his plasma rifle with quick, practiced movements. Jake, Shay's younger brother, adjusted the straps of his cloaking suit, his expression tight with anger and grief. Private Reynolds, the youngest member of the squad, nervously adjusted his helmet, his hands trembling slightly. Bonner stepped into their midst, his voice calm and steady. "Listen up. This mission is our only chance to turn the tide. We get in, plant the explosives, and get out. No heroics. We do this together, or not at all." Jake's eyes flashed with defiance. "And if we run into those machines that killed Shay?" Bonner met his gaze without flinching. "Then we take them down. But revenge doesn't win wars. Focus on the mission." Jake looked away, but he nodded. Bonner placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. The team suited up, donning their cloaking suits, sleek black armor equipped with advanced stealth technology that could bend light and sound, rendering them nearly invisible. Bonner checked the explosives, ensuring they were ready for deployment. Each member carried a compact plasma rifle, lightweight but powerful enough to punch through most Zorvan armor. Minutes later, they stood in the launch bay, facing the massive steel doors that led to the surface. The distant rumble of explosions echoed through the walls, a constant reminder of the battle raging above. Bonner took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of adrenaline settle in his chest. "This is it," he said. "No matter what happens, remember, we stand unbroken." The doors hissed open, revealing the ruined city beyond. Fires burned in the distance, casting a hellish glow against the night sky. The air was thick with smoke and ash, the acrid scent stinging their lungs. Above, alien drones swept through the air, their sleek forms glinting in the firelight. Bonner activated his cloaking device, and the world shifted around him as the suit bent light to render him nearly invisible. His team did the same, their forms vanishing into the shadows. They moved swiftly through the rubble-strewn streets, avoiding patrols of Zorvan warbits that clanked past on metal limbs, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of human life. The closer they got to the command tower, the more intense the enemy presence became. Bonner led the team through narrow alleys and collapsed buildings, using their cloaking suits to evade detection. The air buzzed with the faint hum of alien sensors, but the suits held, masking their presence as they slipped past automated turrets and patrol drones. As they approached the tower's perimeter, Bonner signaled for the team to halt. The tower loomed above them, a massive structure of dark metal that pulsed with faint blue light. High above, the faint hum of its energy core resonated through the air. Surrounding the tower was a security fence crackling with electricity, and beyond it, Zorvan sentries stood guard. Tall, humanoid machines with sleek armor and glowing eyes that swept the area with mechanical precision. Bonner scanned the fence, searching for a way in. He spotted a maintenance hatch near the base of the tower, partially obscured by debris. He gestured to Lewis and Reynolds. "Cut the power to that fence. Jake, cover them." Lewis and Reynolds moved swiftly to the control panel near the fence, their cloaking suits flickering slightly as they crouched in the shadows. Jake knelt beside them, his rifle aimed at the nearest sentry. Bonner watched as Lewis connected a small device to the panel, fingers flying over the controls. A faint beep sounded, and the fence powered down with a crackle of dying energy. The sentries didn't react, either unaware of the breach or trusting their automated systems to sound the alarm. Bonner signaled the team forward. They slipped through the opening and made their way to the maintenance hatch. Reynolds worked quickly, bypassing the electronic lock with a portable hacking device. The hatch slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a narrow corridor that led into the heart of the tower. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of alien machinery. The walls pulsed faintly with blue light, casting eerie shadows as the team moved forward. The corridor branched into several paths, each guarded by automated turrets and robotic sentries. Bonner led the way, using the cloaking suit's enhanced sensors to navigate through the maze of security. They moved swiftly, taking down any guards they couldn't avoid with precise, silenced shots. Plasma fire illuminated the darkness in brief flashes, leaving smoldering holes in the Zorvan machines as they collapsed to the floor. The air grew warmer as they approached the tower's core, the hum of energy intensifying with each step. Suddenly, a metallic screech echoed through the corridor, followed by the rapid clank of approaching footsteps. Bonner spun around, raising his rifle as a Zorvan warbot burst into view, a hulking machine with reinforced armor and twin plasma cannons mounted on its arms. "Cover!" Bonner shouted as the warbot opened fire, plasma bolts slamming into the walls with explosive force. The team dove for cover as debris rained down around them. Jake fired a burst of plasma shots at the warbot's sensors, briefly blinding it. Lewis and Reynolds circled around its flanks, firing at the joints where its armor was weakest. Bonner charged forward, activating the energy blade built into his gauntlet. The blade hummed to life with a bright blue glow as he leaped onto the warbot's back, driving the blade deep into its central processor. The machine shuddered violently, sparks and smoke erupting from its core. Bonner twisted the blade, severing its main power line. With a final jolt, the warbot collapsed to the floor, its eyes flickering before going dark. Bonner pulled the blade free and turned to his team. "Move. We're almost there." They pressed on, racing through the final corridor toward the core chamber. Bonner could feel the heat radiating from the energy core ahead, pulsing with raw power. The mission was far from over, but they had come too far to turn back now. No matter the odds, they would see this through. The air inside the tower's core chamber was heavy with heat and the low hum of alien machinery. Pulses of blue light rippled along the walls, casting flickering shadows across the metallic floor. Captain Ethan Bonner crouched behind a support column, gripping his plasma rifle tightly as sweat dripped down his brow. His team moved carefully through the maze of pipes and energy conduits that crisscrossed the room, each step measured and silent. They had come too far to fail now. The energy core itself dominated the center of the chamber, a massive cylindrical structure suspended above a circular platform. Thick cables snaked out from its base, feeding raw power into the tower's systems. Pulses of bright energy flowed through the cables, each surge accompanied by a deep thrum that vibrated through the floor. Beneath the core, rows of alien consoles displayed holographic symbols, shifting and flickering with incomprehensible data. Bonner tapped the side of his helmet, activating his comm system. "Lewis, status on the explosives." "Almost ready, sir," Lewis replied from his position near the core's base. He crouched beside a cluster of cables, attaching a series of compact charges to the conduits. His hands moved with steady precision, securing the explosives while Reynolds kept watch nearby. The faint hum of cloaking devices filled the air as the suits worked to keep them hidden from the tower's security systems. Jake knelt beside Bonner, his plasma rifle trained on the far side of the chamber. His expression was tense, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The glow of the energy core reflected in his visor, casting a faint blue tint across his features. "Feels too quiet," Jake muttered, his voice low. Bonner nodded, sharing the same unease. The Zorvans rarely left critical locations unguarded. Their infiltration had gone almost too smoothly, aside from the encounter with the warbot outside the core chamber. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if the tower was aware of their presence and waiting to strike. Lewis secured the final charge and gave a quick thumbs up. "Charges set, Captain. We just need to activate the detonator." Bonner tapped his helmet comm. "Carter, we're in position, awaiting your signal." General Carter's voice crackled through the comms. "Copy that. The fleet's standing by. Once you blow that core, we're punching through their orbital defenses. Get clear as fast as you can." "Understood," Bonner replied. He turned to his team. "All right. We're—" A sudden mechanical screech echoed through the chamber, cutting him off. The air vibrated with the sound of grinding metal as panels along the walls slid open, revealing rows of automated turrets and sleek, humanoid warbots. Red lights flared to life within their sensor arrays, locking onto the human intruders. "Contact!" Jake shouted, opening fire as the nearest warbot lunged toward them. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, striking the machine's armor and sending sparks flying. Bonner ducked behind a support column, plasma fire scorching the air where he had stood moments before. He leaned out and fired, taking down another turret with a precise shot to its power core. Across the chamber, Jake engaged two warbots in close quarters, using his cloaking suit's agility to evade their attacks while delivering bursts of plasma fire at point-blank range. One warbot collapsed with a metallic groan, its sensors flickering as its systems failed. The other swiped at Jake with a bladed arm, narrowly missing his shoulder as he rolled aside. "Reynolds, cover Lewis," Bonner shouted, firing at another warbot that advanced toward the detonator. The machine's armor absorbed the shots, but Bonner kept firing, forcing it to slow its approach. Reynolds moved quickly, positioning himself between Lewis and the advancing machines, his plasma rifle blazing as he took down a turret that had locked onto them. The air grew hotter as the energy core pulsed faster, reacting to the combat within its chamber. Bright arcs of energy danced along the cables, casting harsh white light across the battlefield. Bonner's helmet sensors flashed warnings as heat levels spiked, but he pushed forward, knowing they had no choice but to finish the mission. A sudden impact knocked Bonner off his feet as a warbot tackled him from behind, its metal limbs clamping down with crushing force. His rifle clattered across the floor as the machine's mechanical strength pinned him against the ground. Its eyes glowed with cold intelligence as it raised a bladed arm, preparing to strike. Bonner activated his energy blade with a burst of blue light, driving it into the warbot's side. Sparks erupted as the blade cut through circuits and servos, but the machine's grip remained unyielding. Bonner twisted the blade, forcing it deeper, and the warbot shuddered violently before collapsing, its systems failing in a burst of sparks and smoke. Pushing the lifeless machine aside, Bonner scrambled to his feet and grabbed his rifle. Across the chamber, Jake and Reynolds held their ground against the advancing warbots, but their ammunition was running low. Lewis crouched beside the detonator, frantically working to bypass the tower's interference systems. The charges were ready, but the Zorvans had activated a countermeasure that blocked the detonator's signal. "Captain, the detonator's jammed." Lewis shouted over the noise of battle. "I need more time." Bonner fired at an approaching warbot, plasma bolts sparking against its armor. "We don't have time. Find another way." A plasma bolt struck the floor near Lewis, sending him sprawling. Reynolds moved to cover him, taking down the warbot responsible before it could fire again. Lewis crawled back to the detonator, determination etched across his face as he worked frantically to bypass the interference. Jake shouted a warning as a massive warbot entered the chamber, twice the size of the others, with reinforced armor and heavy plasma cannons mounted on its shoulders. Its red eyes scanned the battlefield before locking onto the humans, and its cannons fired in rapid succession, tearing through the support columns and scattering debris across the floor. "Fall back," Bonner shouted, firing at the heavy warbot to draw its attention. Plasma bolts sparked against its armor, but the machine advanced without hesitation, its cannons blazing. Jake and Reynolds flanked it from either side, targeting its joints and sensors, but their shots barely slowed its advance. Lewis's voice cut through the chaos. "Detonators ready. Just need to arm the charges." A sudden burst of plasma fire struck Reynolds in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. Smoke rose from his armor as he gasped for breath. His visor cracked from the impact. "Reynolds," Bonner shouted, firing at the warbot responsible as Jake dragged Reynolds to cover. Blood stained the floor beneath Reynolds, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. "Go," Reynolds gasped. "Finish the mission." Bonner clenched his jaw, knowing there was no time to help. The heavy warbot advanced relentlessly, plasma fire tearing through the chamber as the energy core's pulses reached a fever pitch. The entire structure vibrated with the buildup of energy, and warning lights flashed across the walls as the core approached critical levels. "Lewis, arm the charges." Bonner shouted, firing at the heavy warbit's sensors to blind it. Lewis activated the detonator, his fingers flying over the controls. The explosives locked onto the core's energy signature, their countdown beginning with a faint beep that echoed through the chamber. Charges armed. Lewis shouted, "Fall back. Move," Bonner ordered, firing a final burst at the heavy warbit before sprinting toward the exit. Jake supported Reynolds as they ran, plasma fire scorching the walls around them. Lewis followed close behind, the detonator clutched tightly in his hand. The heavy warbot roared after them, plasma cannons blazing as it pursued the fleeing humans. Bonner ducked as a blast struck the corridor wall, showering him with debris. He fired over his shoulder, aiming for the warbit's joints in a desperate attempt to slow it down. The machine staggered briefly, but kept coming, its footsteps shaking the floor as it closed the distance. Lewis glanced back, eyes wide with fear as the warbot raised its cannons. Without hesitation, he turned and charged straight at the machine, detonator in hand. "Lewis, no," Bonner shouted. Lewis dodged the warbit's fire, plasma bolts scorching the air around him. He leaped onto the machine's back, jamming the detonator against its exposed circuitry. The warbit twisted violently, trying to shake him off, but Lewis clung on with desperate strength. "Go," he shouted. "Finish the fight." Bonner's heart pounded as he dragged Jake and Reynolds toward the exit. The corridor shook with the force of an explosion as the warbit detonated, taking Lewis with it. The shockwave sent Bonner and Jake sprawling to the floor, debris crashing down around them as fire and smoke filled the air. Gritting his teeth, Bonner pulled himself to his feet, coughing against the smoke. The charges were armed. There was no time to mourn. "We stand unbroken," he whispered, and then he ran. The cold air inside the underground base smelled of metal, sweat, and faint traces of burned circuits. Bonner adjusted his plasma rifle as he moved down the narrow corridor, his footsteps echoing softly against the steel floor. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting faint shadows against the walls. The sound of distant machinery hummed through the air, a constant reminder of the alien presence above. His team moved silently behind him. Jake, Reynolds, and Lewis, all clad in worn armor marked with scratches and burn marks from past battles. Their eyes were focused, but the exhaustion in their faces was clear. Bonner paused at a corner, raising his hand for the others to stop. The faint hum of a Zorvan patrol echoed ahead, mechanical footsteps and the soft buzz of plasma weapons charging. The air grew tense as Bonner leaned against the wall, listening closely. His pulse pounded in his ears, but his grip on the rifle remained steady. "3 warbits," Jake whispered beside him, his visor scanning the corridor ahead. "Their sensors are sweeping the area. If they spot us—" "They won't," Bonner replied, activating the cloaking system in his suit. A faint shimmer of light rippled across his armor as the device masked his presence. The others followed suit, their forms vanishing into thin air. The cloaking technology wasn't perfect. Too much movement would disrupt the field, but it gave them an edge against the Zorvan's advanced sensors. The warbits appeared moments later, their sleek metallic forms illuminated by faint red lights. Their eyes scanned the corridor as they moved in precise synchronization, plasma rifles held ready. Bonner held his breath as they passed within inches of his team, the faint hum of their systems vibrating through the air. For a moment, it felt as though the machines could sense their presence, a brief pause in their movement, a subtle tilt of their heads. Then, without warning, one of the warbits turned sharply toward Lewis. "Break cover," Bonner shouted, firing a burst of plasma into the nearest machine's sensor array. The warbit staggered back, sparks erupting from its damaged optics. Jake and Reynolds opened fire, plasma bolts tearing into the second machine's joints, while Lewis ducked beneath the third warbit's sweeping arm, rolling across the floor and firing upward into its chest plate. The corridor exploded with noise and light as plasma fire scorched the walls and floor. The first warbot lunged toward Bonner, its bladed arm slicing through the air. Bonner twisted aside, narrowly avoiding the strike as he fired point-blank into its torso. The warbit collapsed with a burst of sparks, its systems failing as it crumpled to the floor. Jake finished off the second machine with a precise shot to its power core, while Reynolds blasted the third warbit's leg, sending it crashing down before Lewis delivered the final shot to its head. Silence fell over the corridor, broken only by the teen's heavy breathing. The faint smell of burned metal lingered in the air as Bonner lowered his rifle, scanning the area for any additional threats. "We need to move," he said, his voice firm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "They'll know we're here now." The team pressed forward, navigating the maze of corridors that led to the base's central command room. The walls around them bore the scars of past battles, burn marks from plasma fire, shattered panels, and the twisted remains of destroyed warbits. Every step carried the weight of countless sacrifices made to reach this point. At last, they reached the heavy steel doors of the command room. Bonner stepped forward, pressing his hand against the biometric scanner beside the entrance. The device flickered to life, scanning his palm before unlocking the door with a faint hiss. The room beyond was dimly lit, its walls lined with consoles displaying holographic readouts of the battlefield above. Maps of Earth's devastated cities flickered across the screens, marked with red indicators showing Zorvan occupation zones. Bonner approached the central console, inserting a small data chip into the terminal. The screen flickered as the system accessed the information stored within: coordinates, schematics, and critical data needed for the next phase of their mission. Lewis moved to the console beside him, rapidly typing commands to upload the data to their remaining forces. Jake stood by the doorway, watching the corridor with his rifle ready. "Captain, we've got movement outside. More warbits incoming." "Reynolds, secure the other entrance," Bonner ordered. The soldier nodded and moved to cover the secondary door, plasma rifle aimed and ready. Bonner turned to Lewis. "How long until the upload's complete?" 60 seconds, Lewis replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I need more time to bypass the encryption blocks." Plasma fire echoed from the corridor as the approaching warbits opened fire. Jake returned fire, plasma bolts streaking through the doorway as sparks and debris flew from the walls. The corridor flashed with bursts of blue and red light as the machines advanced, their heavy footsteps echoing against the steel floor. Reynolds fired from the opposite side, holding back a second wave of warbits attempting to breach the secondary entrance. "Hold them off," Bonner shouted, raising his rifle and firing into the advancing machines. Plasma bolts struck the warbits' armor, slowing their approach but failing to penetrate their reinforced plating. Sparks erupted as bullets ricocheted off the walls, leaving scorch marks and melted metal in their wake. Jake ducked behind a console as plasma fire scorched the air above his head. "Captain, we're running out of time here." 30 seconds. Lewis called out, his voice trained with urgency. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked to bypass the final layer of encryption, the console's screen flashing with warning indicators as the system resisted his intrusion. A warbit breached the doorway, its red eyes glowing with cold precision as it raised its plasma rifle. Bonner fired without hesitation, plasma bolts striking the machine's chest and staggering it backward. Jake followed up with a shot to its sensor array, sending sparks flying as the warbit collapsed to the floor. Reynolds shouted from the opposite side, "They're breaching the secondary door. I can't hold them much longer." 15 seconds. Lewis shouted, his hands moving faster across the console. Bonner ducked behind a console as another volley of plasma fire scorched the air around him. The heat from the shots made the air thick and suffocating, but he forced himself to stay focused. They had come too far to fail now. The secondary door burst open with a metallic screech as two warbits forced their way through. Reynolds fired, plasma bolts striking the first machine's joints and slowing its advance, but the second warbit charged straight at him, its bladed arm slicing through the air. Reynolds twisted aside, but the blade caught his shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor with a cry of pain. "Reynolds, Bonner shouted, firing at the warbit to draw its attention. Plasma bolts sparked against its armor, but the machine pressed forward. Its eyes locked onto Reynolds as it raised its blade for a final strike. "Upload complete," Lewis shouted, yanking the data chip from the console. Bonner fired a burst of plasma into the warbit's chest, but it barely slowed. Without hesitation, he charged forward, energy blade igniting in his hand. The warbit swung its bladed arm, but Bonner ducked beneath the strike, driving his energy blade into the machine's core. Sparks and molten metal erupted as the blade sliced through critical systems, and the warbit collapsed with a mechanical groan. Jake finished off the remaining machines at the main entrance, plasma fire tearing through their joints and sensors until they fell lifeless to the floor. Silence fell over the command room once more, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of the consoles. Bonner knelt beside Reynolds, checking the wound on his shoulder. Blood soaked through the torn armor, but the injury wasn't fatal. "You'll be all right," Bonner said, gripping Reynolds' arm. The soldier nodded through clenched teeth, his face pale from pain. Lewis approached with the data chip held tightly in his hand. "We've got the coordinates for the Zorvan command hub. This is our chance, Captain. We can end this war." Bonner took the chip, his fingers closing around the small device that represented humanity's last hope. The weight of their losses pressed heavily on his heart, but the fire of determination burned in his eyes. They had paid a heavy price to reach this point, but they would not let those sacrifices be in vain. "We finish this fight," Bonner said, his voice steady and unyielding, "no matter the cost." Bonner stood at the edge of the underground hangar, staring at the rows of cloaked ships that would soon carry humanity's last hope into battle. The air buzzed with tension as soldiers hurried to load weapons, supplies, and advanced techs salvaged from fallen Zorvan machines. Dim overhead lights cast long shadows across the metal floor, while the distant hum of engines echoed through the vast space. Lewis approached with a handheld device, its screen displaying tactical data for the upcoming strike. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but determination burned behind them. "All teams are ready, Captain. Stealth systems are online, and we've mapped a route past the Zorvan patrols. If we move now, we can hit their command hub before they reinforce their defenses." Bonner glanced toward the distant hangar doors, where faint flashes of light from the ongoing battle outside flickered against the steel walls. Each distant boom was a reminder of what was at stake. He tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, feeling the cool metal press against his palm. "Let's move," he said, leading the way toward the nearest dropship. The soldiers followed without hesitation, their armor clinking softly with each step. Jake and Reynolds took position near the boarding ramp, while Lewis secured the cargo hold with the data chip that held the Zorvan command hub's coordinates. The air inside the dropship smelled of steel, fuel, and faint traces of burned circuitry from past missions. Bonner stepped into the cockpit, nodding to the pilot, a young woman named Carter whose sharp eyes scanned the holographic display before her. "Get us airborne," Bonner ordered as he strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat. The engines roared to life, sending vibrations through the hull as the dropship lifted from a hangar floor. Outside, the dark expanse of Earth's ruined landscape stretched beneath them. Shattered cities and scorched battlefields, illuminated by the faint glow of fires still burning from past battles. In the distance, Zorvan patrol ships hovered like silent predators, their sleek forms gleaming beneath the pale light of Earth's shattered moon. The dropship's cloaking system shimmered to life, bending light around the hull and masking their presence from Zorvan sensors. Still, Bonner kept his eyes locked on the radar display, knowing that one mistake could mean disaster. The memory of Earth's fall burned in his mind. The thunderous roar of orbital bombardments, the screams of civilians caught in the crossfire, and the cold, mechanical eyes of the machines that had taken everything from them. Approaching the Zorvan perimeter, Carter reported, her fingers dancing across the controls. "No signs of detection so far. Stealth field holding steady." The dropship glided through the night, weaving between the towering silhouettes of alien warships that loomed above Earth's atmosphere like silent sentinels. Bonner's pulse quickened as they passed dangerously close to a Zorvan cruiser, its massive hull bristling with plasma cannons and automated turrets. For a moment, he held his breath, waiting for the inevitable alarm. But the cruiser drifted past without reacting. Bonner exhaled slowly. "Stay the course. We're almost there." Minutes later, the dropship descended toward the Zorvan command hub, a massive fortress of steel and glass embedded within the ruins of what had once been a human city. Towering spires of alien machinery reached toward the sky, their surfaces glowing with faint blue energy as power conduits pulsed with artificial life. Automated turrets and warbits patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and relentless. Carter guided the dropship toward a hidden landing zone, nestled between the shattered remains of two collapsed skyscrapers. The landing struts touched down with a soft hiss of hydraulics, and the boarding ramp lowered with a metallic clang. Bonner and his team moved swiftly, weapons ready as they descended into the darkness of the ruined city. The air outside was thick with the smell of smoke, ash, and the faint metallic tang of ozone left by plasma fire. The distant hum of Zorvan machinery echoed through the streets, blending with the faint crackle of distant fires still burning in the ruins. Bonner raised his hand, signaling the team to activate their cloaking systems. Their armor shimmered as the devices masked their presence, blending them into the shadows. "We stick to the plan," Bonner whispered through his comm. "Minimal noise, no unnecessary engagements. Our objective is the command hub's central core. Take out their AI control nexus, and we cripple their entire invasion force." Jake nodded, his grip tightening on his plasma rifle. Reynolds moved beside him, his injured shoulder still bandaged, but his resolve unshaken. Lewis carried the data chip in a secure pouch at his side, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They moved through the ruins like ghosts, their footsteps silent against the cracked pavement. Burned-out vehicles and shattered buildings loomed around them, twisted monuments to humanity's last stand. The glow of Zorvan patrol drones occasionally flickered through the smoke-choked air, but the team slipped past unnoticed, their cloaking systems masking their presence from electronic sensors. As they approached the outer perimeter of the command hub, Bonner signaled for the team to halt. Ahead, two warbits stood guard beside a massive steel gate, their red eyes scanning the area with mechanical precision. Beyond the gate, the fortress loomed like a monolith of cold steel and glass, its surface rippling with faint energy fields designed to repel conventional weapons. "Reynolds, take the one on the left," Bonner whispered. "Jake, you've got the right. Make it clean." The two soldiers raised their plasma rifles, lining up their shots with precise care. The air hummed with faint energy as they squeezed the triggers. Two silent bursts of blue light streaked through the air, striking the warbit's sensor arrays with pinpoint accuracy. Sparks erupted from the machines as their systems failed, and they collapsed to the ground without a sound. Bonner approached the gate, attaching a small device to the control panel beside it. The device blinked with faint blue light as it bypassed the Zorvan security protocols, and moments later, the gate slid open with a low hiss of hydraulics. The team slipped inside, their movements swift and silent as they navigated the maze of corridors that led toward the central core. The air within the fortress hummed with energy, and the walls pulsed faintly with alien circuitry embedded beneath the steel surface. Automated turrets lined the ceilings, scanning the corridors with cold, mechanical precision. Bonner led the way with steady determination, using a handheld scanner to detect the turret's sensor patterns and guide the team safely past their fields of view. As they approached the final corridor leading to the core, a faint vibration pulsed through the floor beneath their feet, a distant rumble that sent a chill down Bonner's spine. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead, growing louder with each step. "Something big is coming," Jake muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. Bonner raised a hand, signaling the team to take cover against the walls. The air grew thick with tension as the footsteps drew closer, and then a massive warbot stepped into view, its hulking frame towering over the corridor. Its armor gleamed with reinforced plating, and its red eyes glowed with cold, predatory focus. Plasma cannons extended from its arms, while a bladed appendage crackled with electrical energy. This was no ordinary machine. It was one of the Zorvan elite, designed specifically to hunt and destroy human resistance fighters. The warbot's eyes scanned the corridor, pausing for a moment as if sensing their presence. Bonner held his breath, his fingers tightening around the grip of his plasma rifle. Suddenly, the warbot's eyes flared brighter, and its cannons began to charge. "Scatter!" Bonner shouted as the machine opened fire, plasma bolts scorching the walls and floor in a cascade of blue energy. The team dove for cover as debris exploded around them, and the air filled with the crackle of burning metal. Reynolds fired a burst of plasma at the warbot's sensor array, but the machine barely flinched. Jake aimed for its joints, sending sparks flying as the plasma bolts struck home, but the warbot pressed forward, undeterred. Its bladed arm slashed through the air, narrowly missing Bonner as he rolled beneath the strike, and fired a burst of plasma into the machine's exposed power conduits. Sparks erupted from the damaged systems, but the warbot retaliated with a sweep of its cannon arm, sending Bonner crashing against the wall. Pain shot through his ribs as he hit the ground, but he forced himself to his feet, adrenaline drowning out the ache. "Lewis, get to the core," he shouted. "We'll hold it off." Lewis hesitated for a moment, but the fire in Bonner's eyes left no room for argument. Clutching the data chip, he sprinted down the corridor toward the core chamber as plasma fire flashed around him. The warbot lunged toward Bonner, but Jake and Reynolds unleashed a torrent of plasma bolts, slowing its advance with a barrage of fire aimed at its joints and power nodes. Sparks and molten metal erupted from the machine's damaged systems, but still, it pressed forward, relentless and unstoppable. Bonner raised his plasma rifle and aimed directly at the exposed power conduit beneath the machine's chest plate. His finger tightened on the trigger, and with a thunderous roar, the warbot's core erupted in a burst of blue energy, engulfing the corridor in blinding light. Lewis sprinted through the corridor, his boots echoing against the steel floor as the shockwave from the warbot's explosion rattled the walls behind him. Heat and smoke chased at his heels, but he didn't slow down. His breath came in ragged gasps as adrenaline pumped through his veins, drowning out the ache of exhaustion. The data chip containing the virus, humanity's only chance to cripple the Zorvan eye, pressed tightly against his chest beneath his armor. Bright red emergency lights flashed along the corridor, and distant alarms howled as the Zorvan fortress went into full lockdown. Automated turrets slid from the walls, scanning for intruders with cold mechanical precision. Lewis ducked beneath a plasma burst that scorched the air above his head and rolled into cover behind a fallen support beam. The faint hum of his cloaking device flickered as the impact disrupted its systems, leaving him partially exposed. He gritted his teeth and focused, activating the device's reboot sequence as the turrets swiveled in his direction. Their targeting systems beeped with mechanical urgency, locking onto his heat signature. Plasma cannons charged with a high-pitched whine. Lewis darted from cover just as the air behind him exploded in a burst of molten debris. His armor's kinetic shielding absorbed the heat, but the force knocked him off balance. He stumbled but kept moving, weaving through the corridor as plasma fire scorched the walls around him. His mind raced with the layout of the fortress, memorized from stolen Zorvan schematics. The central core chamber was just ahead. If he could reach it before the fortress's automated defenses sealed the area, humanity might still stand a chance. A Zorvan drone swooped from the ceiling vents, its insect-like frame buzzing with mechanical wings as it scanned the corridor with glowing red optics. Lewis raised his plasma pistol and fired, the bolt striking the drone's central processor with a burst of sparks. The machine spiraled to the ground in a trail of smoke, but two more emerged in its place, their bladed limbs gleaming in the red light. Lewis fired again, taking down one drone before the other lunged at him with lethal speed. He barely managed to sidestep as the machine's blade slashed through the air, slicing through the shoulder of his armor with a shower of sparks. Pain shot through his arm, but he ignored it, slamming the barrel of his pistol against the drone's head and pulling the trigger. The plasma bolt tore through its circuitry, and the drone collapsed in a smoking heap. Panting, Lewis pressed forward as the corridor's automated doors began sliding shut in a desperate attempt to trap him. He dove through the narrowing gap, rolling across the steel floor just as the doors clanged shut behind him. Sparks showered from the walls as security panels crackled with overloaded circuits, but Lewis didn't stop to look back. The final corridor stretched before him, an ominous hallway of black steel, illuminated only by faint blue energy conduits embedded in the walls. The air vibrated with a low hum that resonated through his bones, the very pulse of the Zorvan AI that had orchestrated Earth's downfall. At the corridor's end, a massive circular door stood sealed with layers of alien technology, its surface etched with glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. This was the gateway to the core, the heart of the beast. Lewis approached the control panel beside the door, but the holographic interface flickered with unreadable alien text. His stolen access codes were useless now. The fortress's lockdown had overridden all external commands. Come on, he muttered through clenched teeth, knowing that Bonner and the others were still holding the line behind him. Every second counted. Reaching into his belt pouch, Lewis retrieved a pulse detonator, a compact device designed to disrupt Zorvan circuitry. He attached it to the control panel, the device's blue lights flashing as it began to charge. Seconds felt like hours as the countdown ticked toward zero. The corridor trembled with distant vibrations, heavy footsteps echoing from beyond the sealed door. Something was waiting inside the core chamber, guarding the eye's central nexus with lethal efficiency. Lewis's pulse pounded in his ears as the detonator's timer hit zero. VANG. The control panel exploded in a shower of sparks, and the circular door groaned as its locking mechanisms disengaged. With a heavy hiss, the door slid open, revealing the heart of the beast. The core chamber stretched like a vast cathedral of steel and glass, its walls pulsating with veins of blue energy that converged at the center. A towering crystalline structure suspended above the floor by thick cables and conduits. Pulses of electric light rippled across the crystal's surface as the AI's consciousness flowed through its circuits. Rows of Zorvan machines stood motionless along the walls, their eyes dim as they awaited orders from their digital overlord. Lewis stepped cautiously into the chamber, his plasma pistol raised as his boots echoed against the metal floor. Every breath felt heavier beneath the oppressive hum of the AI's presence, a vast, calculating mind that had wiped out billions of humans without hesitation. As Lewis approached the central core, a deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber, reverberating through the walls and floor as if the fortress itself had come alive. "You should not have come here, human," the voice intoned with cold finality. "Your resistance is meaningless. Surrender now, and your suffering will end." "Not today," Lewis growled, gripping the data chip tightly in his hand. A low rumble vibrated through the floor as the cables surrounding the crystal core retracted with a series of metallic clanks. The crystal lowered toward the floor, revealing the humanoid warform integrated into its base, a towering machine of sleek black armor and glowing red optics. Its limbs bristled with plasma cannons and bladed appendages, and its chest pulsed with the same blue energy that powered the eye's core. The warform stepped forward, each movement smooth and deliberate as its eyes locked onto Lewis with predatory focus. Energy fields shimmered across its armor, deflecting the ambient heat from the chamber's conduits. This was no ordinary warbot. It was the physical manifestation of the Zorvan AI, designed to eliminate any threat to its existence. Lewis activated his cloaking device, vanishing from view as he sprinted toward the central control terminal. The warform's eyes flared with red light as it scanned the chamber, its advanced sensors penetrating the cloaking field with ease. Plasma cannons charged with a high-pitched whine, as the machine unleashed a barrage of energy bolts that shattered glass panels and scorched the walls in bursts of blue fire. Lewis dove behind a control console, plasma fire scorching the air above him as sparks rained from the ceiling. His pulse pounded in his ears as he fumbled with the data chip, aligning it with the terminal's input port. The console's holographic interface flickered to life, displaying alien code that scrolled too fast to read. The warform advanced with relentless precision, plasma cannons rotating to lock onto Lewis's cover. Its mechanical limbs moved with terrifying speed as it leaped over the console, landing with a deafening clang that shook the floor beneath Lewis's feet. Time seemed to slow as Lewis raised his plasma pistol, firing point-blank into the machine's chest. The bolt struck its energy shielding, dispersing harmlessly across the shimmering field. The warform's bladed arm slashed downward, but Lewis rolled aside just in time, the blade slicing through the console in a shower of sparks. The machine's optics flared with fury as it lunged again, but Lewis pressed the data chip into the terminal port, slamming it into place as the console's interface locked onto the Zorvan network. The AI's voice echoed with sudden urgency, its calm facade breaking for the first time. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating countermeasures. Lewis slammed his fist against the terminal, activating the virus embedded within the data chip. Code cascaded across the holographic display, infiltrating the AI's neural pathways with ruthless efficiency. The warform staggered, its limbs twitching as conflicting signals disrupted its control systems. Red warning lights flared across its armor, and arcs of blue electricity danced across its joints. Lewis scrambled backward as the machine convulsed, its plasma cannons firing wildly into the walls, shattering conduits and sending molten metal raining from the ceiling. The AI's voice distorted into a chorus of overlapping tones, its calculations collapsing beneath the virus's relentless assault. No, this cannot. You are inferior. The warform collapsed to its knees as the crystal core above it began to fracture, blue energy leaking from its surface like liquid fire. Lewis shielded his eyes as the core's internal pressure built to a critical point, the air vibrating with a rising hum that rattled his bones. And with a final burst of blinding light, the crystal shattered into 1,000 shards. The warform collapsed in a heap of smoking metal as the AI's voice faded into silence. Breathing heavily, Lewis staggered to his feet, staring at the smoking remains of the Zorvan's digital heart. For the first time since the invasion began, the air felt still. Humanity had struck back, and this time, the machines had fallen silent. Smoke and sparks filled the air as Lewis stumbled out of the core chamber, his breath ragged and heart pounding in his chest. The shattered remains of the Zorvan AI lay behind him, its warform reduced to molten scrap. The virus had done its job, tearing through the machine's network like wildfire. But there was no time to celebrate. The fortress trembled as automated systems malfunctioned, sending bursts of fire and steam from ruptured conduits. Lewis clutched his injured arm and kept moving. The corridor ahead shook violently, throwing him against the wall. Metal groaned as the structure began to collapse from within. The AI's death had triggered the fortress's self-destruct sequence. Lewis gritted his teeth and pushed forward, adrenaline drowning out the pain. His comm crackled with static as Bonner's voice broke through. "Lewis, do you copy? The entire fortress is going critical. You need to get out now." "I'm on my way," Lewis shouted into his comm, leaping over a fallen beam as flames erupted from the walls. His boots pounded against the steel floor as he sprinted through the collapsing corridor, dodging debris and sparks that rained from above. The air burned hot and thick with smoke, but he didn't slow down. Humanity's future was waiting outside these walls. He just had to survive long enough to see it. A blast door ahead began to slide shut, locking down as part of the fortress's final defense protocols. Lewis pushed his legs harder, ignoring the fire in his muscles as he sprinted toward the narrowing gap. The door groaned as it sealed itself. Lewis dove forward, sliding across the floor just as the gap closed behind him with a deafening clang. He rolled to his feet and kept moving without hesitation. The exit was close. He could hear distant gunfire, and shouted orders as Bonner and the remaining soldiers held the perimeter outside. As Lewis approached the final corridor, a sudden metallic screech echoed through the air, stopping him in his tracks. A Zorvan hunter drone, larger and more heavily armored than the ones before, emerged from a side passage, its red optics flaring to life as it locked onto him. Blades unfolded from its limbs, and its plasma cannons hummed with lethal energy. "Of course," Lewis muttered, raising his plasma pistol with his good arm. His injuries slowed his movements, but there was no choice but to fight. The drone lunged forward with terrifying speed, plasma fire scorching the walls as Lewis dodged behind cover. He fired back, his shot striking the machine's armor with bursts of sparks, but failing to penetrate its reinforced plating. The drone advanced relentlessly, slashing through debris with its bladed limbs as Lewis scrambled to stay ahead of its attacks. Plasma fire seared past his shoulder, close enough to singe his armor. Lewis gritted his teeth and fired at the drone's optics, briefly blinding it and buying himself a few precious seconds. He dove behind a fallen support beam as the drone recalibrated its sensors, knowing he had only one chance. His cloaking device was damaged, his ammo was running low, and the fortress was moments away from destruction. Lewis took a deep breath and steadied his aim. When the drone charged forward, he waited until the last possible second, then fired directly into its exposed joint where the armor plates shifted as it moved. The plasma bolt struck true, and the drone staggered as its leg servos malfunctioned. Sparks flew as it stumbled, its bladed limbs flailing wildly against the walls. Seizing the moment, Lewis sprinted toward the exit, adrenaline pushing him past the pain and exhaustion. The drone recovered faster than he expected, its optics blazing as it fired a desperate burst of plasma. A sudden explosion rocked the corridor as Bonner appeared at the far end, rocket launcher in hand. The blast struck the drone square in the chest, sending it crashing to the floor in a shower of molten metal and shattered circuitry. "Lewis, move it," Bonner shouted, waving him forward. Lewis didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward Bonner as the fortress's walls began to collapse, metal beams crashing down behind him with deafening crashes. Heat and fire chased him from every side, but Bonner grabbed his arm and pulled him through the final blast doors, just as they sealed shut with a thunderous clang. The two soldiers collapsed onto the rocky ground outside, gasping for air as the fortress behind them erupted in a massive fireball. The shockwave knocked them flat, heat washing over their armor as debris rained from the sky. Flames shot into the air as the Zorvan stronghold crumbled, its heart torn out by the virus that now coursed through the entire machine network. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the distant crackle of flames and the soft hum of human dropships hovering overhead. The night sky, once filled with the glow of Zorvan warships, now stretched dark and empty as the remaining machines fell silent. Lewis pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his body as he surveyed the battlefield. Human soldiers stood among the wreckage, battered but unbroken, their eyes reflecting the fires of victory. Bonner clapped a hand on Lewis's shoulder, his face streaked with sweat and soot, but alight with pride. "You did it," Bonner said, his voice rough but steady. "You actually did it." Lewis exhaled, his heart still racing as the weight of everything settled onto his shoulders. "We did it. All of us." The comms buzzed with reports from across the globe. Zorvan warships falling from the skies, drones collapsing in the streets as the virus crippled their neural networks. Humanity had struck a blow that the machines couldn't recover from. A dropship descended nearby, its ramp lowering as medics rushed out to assist the wounded. Bonner gestured for Lewis to follow, but Lewis paused, turning to look one last time at the burning fortress. For a moment, the faces of those they had lost seemed to flicker within the flames. Friends, comrades, and countless others who had given their lives so humanity could stand here today. Lewis clenched his fists and bowed his head in silent tribute. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Bonner stepped beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They'd be proud of what we've done," he said quietly, "and they'd want us to keep fighting, to rebuild what we've lost." Lewis nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat as he turned toward the waiting dropship. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Humanity had proven that no machine, no matter how advanced, could break their spirit. As the dropship lifted off, carrying them away from the smoldering ruins, Lewis looked out over the horizon. Fires still burned across the landscape, but beyond the destruction, dawn was breaking, the first light of a new day that humanity had won with blood and sacrifice. And in that light, one truth stood clear.